the most powerful army on earth behind them, towering walls of water on both sides, a nation trapped between certain death and the impossible. And then the sea itself splits open. But here's the question that has haunted historians for 3 millennia. Was this an act of God, or could nature alone explain what happened that night? The story of Moses and the Red Sea. It stands as one of the most iconic moments in all of religious history. An entire people, enslaved for generations, suddenly free, yet pursued by an empire's fury. The Egyptian chariots closed in, their wheels thundering across the desert floor. And then the waters parted. This event, recorded in both the Torah and the Quran, presents us with a narrative so dramatic, so cinematically perfect, that skeptics have spent centuries attempting to rationalize it away. Yet, every naturalistic explanation that emerges only deepens the mystery, only reinforces the impossibility of what occurred. Today, we will examine this event from every angle: the biblical account, the archaeological evidence discovered beneath the sea, the scientific theories proposed to explain it, and most importantly, the question that no natural explanation can ever truly answer: the precision of timing. Because you see, even if nature provided the mechanism, who orchestrated the exact moment? By the end of this exploration, you will understand why this event remains one of history's most compelling testimonies to divine intervention. Let us begin with the scriptural foundation. In Exodus 14, the Israelites stand at the edge of the sea, Pharaoh's army approaching from behind. Moses stretches out his hand, and the Lord causes a strong east wind to blow all night, driving back the waters. The sea divides, the ground becomes dry, and the Israelites cross on foot, walls of water standing firm on their right and left. When the Egyptians pursue, the waters return, drowning the entire army. The Quran corroborates this in Surah 26, describing how Allah commanded Moses to strike the sea with his staff, creating pathways through the depths. Both accounts emphasize the same elements: the division of waters, the dry ground, the destruction of Pharaoh's forces. Now, modern skeptics propose various naturalistic mechanisms. The most popular theory suggests a wind setdown effect, where sustained strong winds push shallow waters aside, temporarily exposing a land bridge. Another hypothesis points to volcanic eruptions on the island of Santorini, causing massive tsunamis that could have created temporary dry passages. A third explanation involves tidal phenomena in the Gulf of Aqaba, where specific geographical conditions might create unusual water movements. These theories share one common goal: to remove the supernatural from the equation, to reduce miracle to meteorology. But here is where every naturalistic explanation collapses under scrutiny. The archaeological evidence beneath the Red Sea tells a story that no wind pattern or volcanic eruption can explain. In recent decades, explorers have discovered chariot wheels, horse bones, and human remains at the bottom of the Gulf of Aqaba, precisely where ancient tradition places the crossing site. These are not random artifacts. They are Egyptian military equipment, wheels with gold plating consistent with the 18th dynasty, the era of the Exodus. 4-spoked wheels, 6-spoked wheels, even 8-spoked wheels, all matching the chariot designs of ancient Egypt. The distribution of these remains forms a concentrated pathway across the sea floor, a corridor of destruction that aligns perfectly with the biblical narrative. Consider the implications. If this were merely a natural event, a fortuitous wind pattern, or tidal anomaly, why would an entire army drive directly into it? The Egyptians were master strategists, experienced in desert warfare and geography. They would never have pursued prey into unstable waters, unless those waters appeared completely stable, completely safe. The biblical account explains this perfectly. The Israelites crossed on dry ground, The waters held back, creating an apparent solid passage. The Egyptians saw safety where there was only temporary divine suspension of natural law. The wind setdown theory, popular among skeptics, proposes that sustained 63 miles per hour winds for 12 hours could push back waters in certain shallow areas, creating temporary land bridges. But this explanation immediately encounters multiple problems. First, such wind conditions would make it impossible for 2 million people, including elderly, children, and livestock, to cross. They would be blown off their feet, scattered, destroyed by the very wind supposedly saving them. Second, wind setdown requires extremely shallow water, perhaps 3 to 6 feet deep, yet the archaeological evidence shows chariot remains in areas far deeper than this, in sections of the sea exceeding 800 feet in depth. Third, and most critically, the wind setdown effect creates gradual, unstable conditions, not the towering walls of water described in Scripture. The biblical text specifies that waters stood up like walls on both sides, a vertical suspension of liquid mass that no wind pattern can achieve. The volcanic tsunami theory fares no better. Yes, Santorini erupted around 1600 BCE, potentially within the Exodus time frame. And yes, volcanic tsunamis can cause dramatic water movements. But tsunamis are characterized by chaos, not order. They surge and recede multiple times, creating unpredictable, violent conditions. A tsunami would never create the stable, prolonged dry passage described in both Torah and Quran. A passage stable enough for millions to cross with their possessions, their animals, their elderly and infants. Moreover, tsunami effects would impact both the Israelites and the Egyptians equally. There would be no selective destruction of one group while the other passes safely. The tidal theory suggests that specific geographical formations in the Gulf of Aqaba could create unusual tidal patterns, perhaps combined with seismic activity, to expose temporary land bridges. But tides operate on predictable cycles. They are not sudden events that can be triggered at the exact moment of human need. The biblical account describes a crisis point, the Egyptian army closing in. No time for waiting until the next low tide cycle. Moses stretches out his hand, and immediately the process begins. Waters dividing that very night, crossing completed before dawn. Egyptians destroyed in the morning. This is not the rhythm of tides. This is the intervention of will. And this brings us to the central question that dismantles all naturalistic explanations: timing. Even if we grant, for argument's sake, that wind or tide or volcanic activity could create the necessary conditions, how do we explain the precision of occurrence? Moses and the Israelites arrive at the sea at the exact moment when these natural forces align. The Egyptian army pursues at the exact moment when the temporary passage exists. The waters return at the exact moment when the Israelites have finished crossing, but the Egyptians have fully entered. This is not coincidence. This is orchestration, and orchestration requires an orchestrator. The probability calculations are staggering. The convergence of multiple factors, the geographical location, the timing of arrival, the stability of the passage, the duration sufficient for 2 million people to cross, the immediate collapse upon completion. This combination of prerequisites reduces the probability of natural occurrence to essentially zero. We are not discussing one fortunate event. We are discussing a sequence of perfectly timed, perfectly coordinated phenomena that align with human agency, with Moses' outstretched hand, with God's promise to deliver his people. Critics often argue that the biblical account was written centuries after the event, embellished through oral tradition, transformed from a minor natural occurrence into a supernatural spectacle. But this argument ignores the archaeological evidence. The chariot wheels are not legends. They are metal and wood resting on the sea floor. It ignores the cultural impact. An entire nation's identity formed around this event. Festivals established, songs composed, the memory embedded so deeply into collective consciousness that fabrication becomes impossible. It ignores the testimony of ancient historians like Josephus, who recorded details of the crossing that align with biblical accounts despite writing from a secular perspective. The emotional weight of this event cannot be overstated. Imagine standing at that shore. Slavery's chains barely removed from your wrists. Pharaoh's army approaching. The sound of chariot wheels growing louder. The dust cloud rising on the horizon. Your children cling to you. Your elderly parents lean on your shoulder. There is nowhere to run. The sea blocks escape. Death approaches from behind. And then the impossible begins. The waters move. They divide. They stand upright, defying every law of physics you have ever observed. And a pathway opens through the depths. The ground beneath your feet, moments ago covered by fathoms of water, now dry and firm. You step forward, walls of liquid tower above you, fish suspended in the vertical barriers, sunlight filtering through the transparent masses. This is not merely survival. This is witness to the suspension of natural order. This is encounter with the divine. The destruction of the Egyptian army holds equal weight. These were not abstract enemies. These were the taskmasters who had beaten you, the officials who had ordered your children killed, the empire that had consumed your life and your ancestors' lives for 400 years. And in one moment, in one night, their power ends. Their chariots swallowed, their horses drowned, their pharaoh's pride shattered. The same waters that saved you destroyed them. The same passage that gave you life took theirs. This is justice enacted through creation itself, nature obeying a moral imperative that transcends survival of the fittest. Modern engineering analyses of the biblical dimensions reveal additional insights. The text describes the Israelites crossing from one side to the other, a distance estimated at 10 to 15 kilometers, depending on the specific location. With approximately 2 million people, plus livestock and possessions, crossing in a single night requires multiple parallel pathways, perhaps 20 to 30 corridors through the sea, to accommodate the mass movement. The biblical phrase, walls of water on their right and left, suggests precisely this. Multiple passages with water barriers between them, an organized structure rather than a single narrow channel. This level of complexity, this engineered division of the sea, points again to intentional design rather than random natural occurrence. The chariot wheels discovered underwater offer another layer of evidence. Egyptian chariots of the 18th dynasty, Pharaoh's elite military technology, used specific wheel configurations. 4 spokes for standard chariots, 6 or 8 for royal or ceremonial vehicles. The wheels found at the crossing site match these patterns exactly, and several retain traces of gold plating, indicating high-status military equipment. The coral growth on these artifacts has been analyzed, suggesting they have remained submerged for approximately 3,500 years. Consistent with the traditional Exodus dating. The concentration of remains in a specific corridor across the sea floor, rather than scattered randomly, indicates a rapid, catastrophic event affecting an organized military force in motion, exactly as the biblical narrative describes. Some scholars argue that the crossing occurred at the Reed Sea, a marshy area near modern-day Suez, rather than the deep Red Sea. But this theory creates more problems than it solves. Marshlands do not require miraculous parting. They can be traversed on foot naturally, especially during dry seasons. The biblical text emphasizes the dramatic nature of the event. Walls of water, dry ground, the destruction of an entire army. None of this occurs in shallow marshes. Additionally, the Hebrew term Yam Suf has been debated extensively, with strong linguistic evidence supporting Red Sea rather than Reed Sea. The Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation made by Jewish scholars familiar with the original Hebrew, translates it as Red Sea. And this translation predates modern skepticism by 2 millennia. The moral dimensions of this event extend beyond physical deliverance. The Red Sea crossing represents transformation, a people transitioning from slavery to freedom. from oppression to identity, from victimhood to nation. The water itself becomes a symbol of baptism, of death to the old life, and birth into the new. The Apostle Paul would later draw this parallel, describing how the Israelites were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, a spiritual reality enacted through physical phenomena. This theological interpretation does not diminish the historical event, it enhances it, showing how divine action operates simultaneously on multiple levels: physical rescue, spiritual transformation, and prophetic foreshadowing. The question of divine intervention versus natural law is ultimately a false dichotomy. God, as creator of natural law, can employ natural mechanisms while directing them with supernatural precision. The wind that blew all night, mentioned in Exodus, may well have been a physical wind, 63 miles per hour sustained for 12 hours, but its timing, its direction, its exact force calibrated to create the necessary conditions at the necessary moment. This is where divine will operates. Nature becomes the instrument, the means through which the impossible becomes possible. But the conductor of this symphony is not random chance. It is intentional purpose. Every naturalistic explanation for the Red Sea crossing ultimately requires more faith than accepting the supernatural account. Faith that wind patterns aligned with human need by pure coincidence. Faith that volcanic eruptions occurred at the exact moment of crisis. Faith that tidal anomalies created stable passages precisely when required. Faith that chariot wheels ended up at the sea floor through some unspecified natural process, unrelated to the biblical narrative. At some point, skepticism becomes credulity, and the simpler explanation, the one requiring less assumption and fewer coincidences, is the one recorded in Scripture. God acted, nature obeyed, and a people were delivered. This event established a pattern that echoes through subsequent biblical history. Crossing through water becomes a recurring motif. Joshua leading Israel through the Jordan River, which parts just as the Red Sea had. Elijah striking the water with his cloak, creating a path to cross. Jesus walking on water, demonstrating authority over the same element. Each instance points back to the original, to Moses at the Red Sea, establishing that the God who controls water controls creation itself, and that this control is exercised for the purpose of deliverance, of bringing people from death to life. The archaeological, geological, and textual evidence converges on a single conclusion. Something extraordinary occurred at the Red Sea approximately 3,500 years ago, an event so dramatic and so consequential that it shaped the religious consciousness of billions of people across millennia. The naturalistic explanations, while creative, failed to account for the totality of evidence, the timing, the scale, the archaeological remains, the cultural impact, the theological significance. The supernatural explanation, far from being a retreat into superstition, is actually the most rational interpretation of the available data. When we exhaust all natural possibilities, when every mechanistic explanation collapses under scrutiny, we are left with the conclusion that the ancients themselves reached. We witness the hand of God dividing the waters, and nothing has ever been the same. So here is the challenge for the skeptic and the believer alike. Do not approach this event as mythology or legend. Approach it as history. Examine the evidence, study the geography, consider the probabilities, and then ask yourself honestly, which requires more faith, to believe that every factor aligned by pure chance, or to accept that divine intervention occurred precisely as recorded. The answer to that question changes everything. Because if God parted the Red Sea for Moses, then the same power remains available today. The same deliverance, the same impossible made possible, the same divine hand operating in human history. The waters stand as testimony, the chariot wheels rest as witness, and the question remains for every generation: Will you believe what your eyes cannot see, but evidence demands? May the God who split the sea split open your heart to truth, wherever that truth may lead.